this is valuable to you. I just wanted to give a brief bit of information about what I do, and then I'm sure Dorna will probably introduce her greater detail and talk about Documate a little bit as well when she takes over here in a couple slides. So my name is Jared Correia, and I run a company called Red Cave Law Firm Consulting. I do consulting exclusively for lawyers and law firms. Been doing that for 12 or so years. I have had 5,000 law firm clients in that time. I have not practiced law in anger in many years, although I am a practicing attorney, or I was a practicing attorney. I have a law degree, the real deal. But I just enjoyed consulting more and decided to focus on that. So in that context of consulting, I have a number of private clients, both in the US and also internationally. And then I also have member benefits with bar associations. So I am the preferred consultant for a number of bar associations around the country as well. And I talk to a lot of lawyers across a lot of different practice areas with a lot of different focus points as well. And what's interesting is that there are a number of different ways to run a practice successfully in 2020, especially given the technology advances that have taken place in legal. And that's something that we'll talk about in some greater detail. But I've noticed that a lot of the changes in the way lawyers practice have been led by a change in the way that legal consumers interact with law firms. And there's some specific ways that that takes place. We're definitely going to get to this notion of productizing a law firm, moving from services to products, which is a non-traditional way of thinking about selling legal. However, I think in terms of prologue, it's helpful to talk about the way that consumers interact with lawyers or want to interact with lawyers. Lawyers don't always interact with them the way they want to be interacted with. And then over to that subject. So let's talk about what modern legal consumers want from law firms. There's 4 components that I think are important. And this is not just me talking, although anecdotally, I see these things as being the case. This has started to come out in terms of studies and data that have been released. Probably most relevantly, if relevantly is a word, I'm not sure if it is. If folks have looked at the Clio Legal Trends Report, the last one that came out, 2019, that's a 5-year longitudinal study of a bunch of different law firms across the country, across North America, actually. And this report comes out every year. It's instructive, and then it has a theme every year. And this year's theme was essentially like law firm productivity and profitability. But there was a lot of information there about legal consumers as well. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about here is also available in that report. So if you want to dive into the numbers in greater detail and see what this looks like, I would download the Clio Legal Trends Report from last year, 2019, which is free. So in terms of like modern legal consumers, one thing they definitively want from lawyers is engagement. So legal consumers don't want to have a contact form that they're submitting information to. That goes into the ether. They have no idea what happens with that. They don't necessarily want to fill out an intake form, leave it on somebody's desk, walk away, and not hear from the lawyer. There'll be some kind of engagement, which means that there's got to be some kind of give and take, some level of interaction. So is something actually happening that the legal consumer can hang their hat on? Is there a next step? Is there a call to action of some kind? They don't necessarily want to leave a voicemail either and just wait to hear from a lawyer umpteen weeks later, which is usually how it goes. So when you're thinking about how you run your law firm, how you intake clients, what level of engagement are you providing? Is there a way that they can interact with the law firm? And I think what's relevant to what we're going to talk about a little bit later is there a way that they can interact with the law firm without necessarily a human being involved in that process? Is there a way to automate engagement in some cases? And I believe that there is. And in terms of like creating a product line as a law firm, one way to automate engagement in a specific way. Now, the reason why this is important is because if you look at the studies on this, FindLaw released a study, I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, that said 89% of the time, if a client talks to a law firm, got a response of some kind, so that engagement, like they submit information, they get information, um, they would choose that law firm 89% of the time. So it provides some level of engagement in your law firm. Almost 9 out of 10 times, the consumer is going to choose you before they even consider going to another law firm. Price certainty is something that legal consumers are looking for. And look around the way that people buy services these days, right? So I buy Netflix. I get a Netflix subscription. I get a Disney Plus subscription. I'm paying $7 a month, $15 a month for every movie known to man, right? People purchase cost certain items and they get big value out of that. Now think about legal. It's almost the opposite. You pay for big ticket items and you don't necessarily know what's being provided. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's very easy for you on Netflix as a consumer. Click the play button and watch a movie. As a consumer engagement firm, that's a lot more confusing understanding the legal process. We'll talk about that in a moment. So if you can provide some level of price certainty, some level of value, that's really important. And if you look at what consumers want law firms in 2020, it's not just cost certainty in the sense of I charge $400 an hour until whenever the case is done. They want information about the total cost of the representation. And that's difficult to provide in the service industry. I'll switch these last two. The other thing is information about the legal process, right? If you think about it, your client, your lead, maybe has never talked to a lawyer before. Maybe will talk to a lawyer only one time in their life, and they have no clue about what's happening to them. So providing information about the legal process is another way to get leads over the finish line. And lawyers tend not to do this because they don't understand the disconnect between consumers and lawyers. Consumers know so little about the legal process that providing them any type of information is really important. Again, this is not like pressing play on a remote control, right? So lawyers are reticent to provide information about the legal process for a couple of reasons. One is they're worried about ethical issues, is that they've been told not to sell the farm, right? Don't give away everything for free, make people pay for it. But the modern consumer is more interested in doing their own research, finding out their own information. And so if they can find someone who can be their guide and help them through a process that they don't understand, there's real value in that. And I think a lot of people feel like a consumer is going to go out and do the work themselves, which is kind of silly. Like somebody going to go, oh, hey, I'm going to go to the law school, finish that up, take care of my case, and then contact you 5 years from now and let you know how it went. It's not going to happen. If I'm hiring a plumber to stink my toilet, I'm going to let that dude stink my toilet. So providing information about the legal process is helpful. And you can protect yourself by providing disclaimers and non-engagement agreements if lead does the attorney-client relationship at any point during those conversations. Last thing is subject matter expertise, right? Somebody who's a legal consumer doesn't just want to know that you're good at being a lawyer. Like every law firm in the world is expert at that, right? You got your super lawyer awards on your website. Everybody knows you're an amazing lawyer, but can you help them with their specific problem? So providing information about your subject matter expertise, like the expertise that you have in a particular practice niche, and not just the expertise that you have generally as a lawyer, is really important. And so we'll go to the next slide here, and I'll be a lot quicker on this one. So the next thing to talk about here is the characteristics of modern law firm consumers. So as I mentioned before, if you look at the information on this, legal consumers are relying less and less on referrals from traditional sources. That means other lawyers, that means other business professionals. Most modern consumers are either going to get referrals from family members or they're going to do their own research. There's a lot of options out there. These consumers are going to look for those options aggressively, and that's going to be the main criteria they're going to use to select a lawyer. So being able to provide information about your subject matter expertise, about your practice, really differentiates you there. That's because a lot of these modern consumers have a DIY mindset, right? They want to be able to do it themselves if they can. And if they think they can do it themselves, they're not going to hire a lawyer. So how do you figure out how to reach those clients? Or is it even possible to reach those clients? What we're going to argue today is that it is. But that's one of the things you need to combat in terms of modern legal consumers, that they really want to do stuff on their own. And you have to show them, again, talking about how difficult it is, the legal process, that you can be their guide, and it's going to be far easier to provide that service for them than having them try to provide the service for themselves. And there's also going to be a cost value for that. Because remember, consumers have more leverage than they've ever had before. You can do a Google search and find 100 law firms in your area, right? I live in Massachusetts. There's something like 13 people for every lawyer in the state. I could literally skip a rock from my house and hit 5 attorneys. So there's been this power shift that's taken place where you've now got consumers in the driver's seat, less so than lawyers. And lawyers have yet to react, but these are some of the ways that you can react. And a lot of this will serve to undergird our discussion of document automation and how you can turn that into a law firm product. And now I'll turn it over to Dorna for a little bit.
Thank you, Jared. So let me give you guys a little bit more background on my background as well, and then I can dive into sort of what we've seen, what I've seen in my practice and what we've seen with our clients in terms of the commoditization of legal practice. So I actually used to be a lawyer and practiced for about 7 years, and saw during that time a huge shift in the way that legal services were being provided and what consumers, and not just consumers, but any kind of client, whether that's your corporate client or your consumer-based client, is looking for in terms of the services that they're providing and the services that you're providing to them. I then started a document automation company that is called Documate. And what we were aiming to do was to solve what has been called the more for less problem, which is that consumers and clients of legal services are constantly wanting to get more for less money. And that's really well illustrated by this graph on commoditization, which I actually pulled from Richard Susskind's book on Tomorrow's Lawyers, if any of you guys are big Richard Susskind fans. And what he does is, I think that a lot of times commoditization is thought of as a bit of a negative term, but we should really all embrace it as something that's actually creating quite a bit of opportunity for those lawyers who are willing to create products as opposed to sticking to only providing services. So the graph that you see here, the diagram that you see here, it really illustrates the bespoke legal services, which have been the way that traditional legal services have always been provided. You go into someone's office and they give you exactly what you need, and they tailor the document exactly to what your needs are, and there's no level of overlap. You're recreating the wheel every single time. However, what we've seen is that there's been a move within legal services from providing a service from one person to providing services from one person to many people. And there are sort of two changes in the legal practice that have led to this shift. One is that lawyers are now able to capture and reuse a lot of the know-how that they have. And then two is that in a lot of, in using online legal services, they can use that content to benefit many users at one time. Instead of handling legal guidance as though it were disposable, it's something that can sort of at least partially be recycled to be able to deliver it to more people. At the same time, kind of on the same lines as what Jared was saying, there's been a shift in pricing too. There's been a shift to commodity-based pricing, specifically fixed fees, subscription services, and as Jared said, clients really want certainty. But this can actually be a huge boon for those who want to be part of it, because we're waking up this middle class of latent legal market that has not really participated in getting services from lawyers in the past. So going down this diagram, think of the bespoke, we've discussed the bespoke legal services. That's the traditional way that legal services are done with unique circumstances for the client. Then we have standardization. So a lot of clients expect some form of standardization, and that can often be done through checklists or having some sort of process or having templates set up, which even for, the most, I used to be a litigator, and a lot of what we did was not necessarily recyclable, but you had templates for motions and templates for summary judgment motions that you could at least reuse the initial pieces of. But then we move down along the line to systematization. So systematization would be turning those templates and checklists and processes that you already have in place into workflows. And one of the ways that you can do that is through document automation. So through document automation, you can have a series of questions on, for example, let's think about an employment agreement. You can have a series of questions that ask the employer their start date, their salary, whether they're exempt, all kinds of questions about that you have calculations for in the document and conditionality for in the document. And after those questions are answered, whether those are answered by someone at the law firm, the lawyer, the paralegal, someone else on staff, or whether those are answered by the client themselves, you at the end have a policy and has all of those changes. Now, on the right of everything that you see on the vertical side, these are ways that systematization can be used to benefit your law practice. So let's start at the bottom. That would be things that are in the comments, so things that are not, like if any of you guys have seen the Cornell Law Institute, if you've ever Googled a statute, they usually pop up right at the top, and they put a ton of information online that now everyone has access to. And while it is free, I mean, and Cornell is obviously a university, but if there were lawyers who were doing the same, that actually does drive a lot of traffic towards your site. And when people are making decisions about actual legal services, that may lead them in your direction. Search online would be something that moves outside of the sphere of just pure information and moves towards workflows online. So we've seen a lot of courts and legal aid organizations who provide no charge online workflows, where you have essentially, the analogy uses the TurboTax for law. So they have TurboTax for a particular area of law, and you can go through it and generate your documents at no charge. And then the third one up there is charge online. So this is where you are turning your workflows into a real legal tech company. There are lots of examples out there of other companies that have done that. You essentially become a TurboTax for a particular area of law. And I'll talk in a little bit about interest in building something like that, and whether that's something internally or that you use externally. Client have a full-fledged legal technology company that your law firm. There are some steps that you should take in terms of the process to think about this. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. So I'm going to talk right now about what you should be doing before you're building a document automation product or any kind of product that you're releasing to the market. And then right afterwards, I'm going to talk about what you should be doing after you build that product. And there's all the maintenance that goes along with it. So the basic steps would be, you're going to want to define what data you're gathering from the user, develop your templates, and then you'll write your documentation and market your system. So let's start with the first bullet here, which is defining your project. So first, you'll want to make sure that what you have planned is doable. It's really important to be realistic about the scope. You can always start, it's better to start small with something narrow in scope and then add on to it as you go on. You can always add more documents or more complexity as you build your product out. If you think about, there are companies out there, not even just in the legal sphere. If you think about a lot of the big companies that are out there, they started small with a product that was needed by a small subset of users, tested it, and then moved and grew from there. So, the examples, some of that are, Yahoo was actually started by the founders to dig up websites that they wanted to revisit later. It wasn't meant to be a full-fledged search and full company platform. Same with Facebook, who we all know, social network for several thousand people, but was not imagined at the very beginning, or was at least not built out to be the broader scope project that it is now. So want to make sure that your pain points are real. So if you're building a product, it's, and most of the people on this call are law firms, there's law firms. So you probably already know that the pain point is real because you're providing these services to your clients every day. Then the last few on the definition side is just making sure that you have you have features scoped out before you build it out, and then making sure that cost and sustainability make sense. So if you're going to be putting out a product, make sure that you're going to be able to sell it at a rate that's going to make it sustainable, and you're not going to be customer acquisition costs. Next step is doing your due diligence. So you'll want to think very quickly who your users will be. Will your users just be people within your firm who are and building out your documents more quickly? Or will your audience be the external consumers? That's important to think about when you're building. What is the status quo? That's the next thing you want to think. What are people using as an alternative to this? Is it regular legal services? Are there other products? Like, I never think it's a bad idea I don't think just because there's another product out there that's similar to what you want to build, that precludes you from being, being able to create a new product. But just think clearly about, if there is something out there, why are you going to be better? And why is your solution going to be better? What are you going to do better and differently? Thinking about your market size is also important. So but if you're starting with LA County in California, you want to have a clear trajectory into how you expand into the 58 counties in California if there are specific local rules and local forms that you need to be thinking about. But that's probably something that would be easy to tack on and add on. And then finding your benefits for your users. Last step is, before you build, engaging your users is incredibly valuable. A lot of people don't do this because they think they know what's best for the consumer. But if you can get some of the people who are going to be using your platform on board to even just have initial conversations with, to interview them, incredibly valuable to preventing mistakes, and really something that works for everyone. Something else that's really important here is, if you are going to have an audience who is consumers, make something that has a reading level of, usually about 6th grade is a good reading level to have. And you may want to go a little bit higher or a little bit lower depending on who your end consumer is. Managing expectations. So that is really important, especially if you're building something for an internal audience. So we have a lot of on our platform, on Documate, who are within a firm and they may be creating products for the rest of the firm. That's one place where you want to manage expectations in terms of what the scope is and what the timeline is, and how you're going to get it released into consumers. You're probably not really telling them about the product until then, so that point is not as important. And then making sure you're solving unique problems. So these are some of the things you'll want to do before, but once you actually build out your product and you launch it, there is a lot. If you build a software platform, or if you build some kind of legal product, you can just put it out onto the internet and your work is done. And people will just keep coming in. And, to an extent, true. Recurring revenue, if you're building a legal product, recurring revenue while you're on vacation and you know that your product is working well is really amazing when you want to build for your entire life or your entire career. But there are things you should keep doing after the product is launched. So starting with testing and creating user profiles of who your user is and continuously testing with them is really important. One of the things that we have on the Documate platform that we think is really useful is we allow you to create different users. So let's say you're a divorce attorney and you're creating a divorce platform. What you can do is you can create an answer set for divorce with no children, divorce with children, some kind of custody visitation arrangement. And then every single time you launch a workflow, you can send that set of data for client Jane Doe or John Smith, and that you can test every single different scenario that might come up and make sure that it's perfect before you launch it. UX testing is also super useful. We have we allow people to implement videos and images and audio within their workflows. that's something that you might want to test with users and see, how do they interact with these videos? Is it useful? Do you need to shorten them, lengthen them? That's going to be really, really valuable as well. Then once you launch, you will want to have both people support and also documentation that is, ample documentation for people to be able to use your product. People learn in different ways. So obviously human based would have a chat button or something where you can answer people's questions about the software if they're confused or if they're having any kind of trouble. But in terms of documentation, the recommend that you do two different types of documentation. One is video and one is written, because your customers will have very different learning styles. Some may learn more about video through video, and some may learn more through reading some of the instructions you have on what the process should be. And then finally, after launch, what a lot of users find, a lot of lawyers find very valuable is you have a product and you have a software product that you may have built and that you release into the world, but sometimes that product might meet all of the needs of your consumer. If there is a case that is much more complex, so you maybe, let's say you launch a product, like uncontested divorces, and you have something very unique situation with lots of assets, you may not want that person to go through the workflow. You want them to instead go through you and provide services to them. So that's one place where you can actually build a little bit of additional business for your law firm through those services when they've already reached that channel. And then finally, marketing. Marketing is, we help a lot of our users with this, so we can always, help blog posts about you, introduce you to different like press channels, and it will be important to know who your stakeholders are and get those evangelists on board to spread the word. And then in terms of building up your credibility, you'll want to make sure that you're constantly updated. One thing that's really useful is to constantly have an update date on workflows, to say this workflow was updated on this date, because then when people come onto the site, they see, it is modified in March 2020. So I know this is being constantly modified. I know this is up to date. I know this is going to protect my legal rights. So that's kind of the scope of what you'll want to do after you build out that first phase. And I will pass it over to Jared.
That was good stuff. It's always funny when I do these webinars and I start talking to lawyers, as you just did, Dorna, about like managing a law firm, kind of like you would a software company. And as someone like myself who's worked with a law firm, inside of a law firm, as a consultant who also owns a software company, I think it's really valuable for lawyers to think differently about how they're going to run a law firm. As I mentioned before, consumer trends are changing to the technology and tools that law firms have access to. And in my experience, making small changes in a law is really valuable. So I was speaking before about the Legal Trends report from this past year. And one of the things that report also identified was that attorneys who are more efficient, law firms that are efficient, make massive revenue gains. So just big utilization at a law firm, an industry average of like 29% to like 33%. Within their study, those firms made something like double their revenue over the 5 years. That's the type of thing you can do in legal right now, when a lot of law firms are still not thinking about this stuff in this way as the market around them changes. So if you can be 1% more innovative as a law firm, it's going to have massive effects. So now that we got some information about how you would create and utilize document automation as something of a client-facing tool, and you would do that much the same that you would build out a software product for a client base. What about differences between products and services? So law firms have traditionally been a service-based business. There's the famous Abraham Lincoln, an attorney is a stock in trade, right? So what you do when you're a service professional is trade your time and expertise from The problem is that it's very high touch. So you need a person to be able to render those services, right? There has to be a go-between, a human who's going to manage that in many cases. And that's high touch. Now, selling a product is different. So in law school, every hypothetical involved widget making, right? So it's a very different thing to run a company that makes widgets versus a company that sells services. So if you've got your efficiency down, if your overhead costs are relatively low or as low as they can get, and you can start mass producing things, you're going to be in good shape. You're going to make a lot of money, and you don't necessarily need more people to make more money. You just produce more products, right? And I know Seuss's birthday was a few days ago, right? So if folks have read the Lorax, out of the trees, and they just mass produce the hell out of it until there are no more trees. The difference between a product and a service, right? So if you can develop a product out of a law firm, which is something that you can sell, an item that you can sell that doesn't necessarily require attorney intervention, although it could, that's going to be more affordable for you, also more scalable. And so service industries tougher to scale, right? Because there's just a time component attached to that. You need people providing services, and then you also need more people to provide those services. You can't necessarily clone more people. You can't clone yourself. You have to find those people. So there's some limitations there that don't exist with products. So one of the reasons are really valuable for law firms once you can produce those is that they hit all the checkpoints for modern law firm consumers, right? And let's talk about a specific product type the law firm could build. Like we mentioned LegalZoom in the intro and in the title to this presentation. And why law firms can't also sell products that are documents without the legal services attached, supplemental legal services, right? So your two options are to say, okay, here's a document I'm selling you. That's the product. You buy this document. We're done. Best of luck. Or you could say, hey, this is a document I'm selling you. You buy the document, and then you can buy ancillary legal services on top of that. No reason law firms can't do that. They just haven't. So about the way the modern students interact with law firms, some of the things they want, right? Price certainty. Know what the thing is. A document, it's much easier to price on that than a service, right? Because if you're selling a service, you don't know how long it takes to get service. As if you have a document to somebody, you say, here, document, pay money, we're done. That's the transaction, and you can fill a completely different thing. There is absolute total as far as the limited transaction is concerned. Law engagement. So if legal consumers want engagement, what engage clients in helping their own documents, right? You send form, spits out a single product. You think, great, right? That's all bound up in this notion of a law firm. A little bit about your subject matter expertise. You have a paid startup document package that you sell them. What is more niche than that? All these markers that we talked about before, you've got a client now who will want to know the fourth component or they won't. So the fourth component of what consumers want, as I addressed, is not in the legal process. Some people don't care all that much about the legal process, right? But they're not the ones who are going to use a lawyer. So that revenue is gone if you're a lawyer. And you can figure out a way to appeal to DIY people. And selling products way to appeal to people who otherwise be DIY clients. So you sell them the product and then do it on their own from there. Now, let's say you have 10 of those clients in any given year and you're charging $500 a document. I suck at math. I think that's $5,000. That's $5,000 you wouldn't have been able to capture if you were selling traditional legal services. Now, I'm not saying you just do products and not services, but you can absolutely do both. And products give you access to a section of the market that you haven't had access to previously. So I'm done with this slide. Now, Dorna, I can't remember if I have another slide or you do. So maybe we can move to 8 and maybe I'll be surprised and maybe I won't. All right, handing it back to you.
All right, perfect. So thank you, Jared. What I'm going to talk about next is sort of what's possible. What are the different things that you can build with document automation workflows, and whether internal or external. So those are the two categories. You can build things internally for your firm, or you can build things that are externally facing for whether they're for attorneys, other attorneys, or whether they are for legal consumers, which could be other attorneys who are in-house or within corporate legal departments. So let's talk first about internal tools. This is probably the traditional way that people think about document automation is something, a software that's on your desktop and that is not yet cloud-based and that you can use internally to generate documents. You'll set up all kinds of questions. There are sort of three main things that make a document automation platform able to do everything that you need it to do to generate documents. One is simple variables, meaning you ask for the client's name, you populate it throughout the document. That's something that you have seen probably in things like mail merge in the past. This conditional logic. So you can set up all kinds of conditional logic to say that if someone answers that their marital status is married, then maybe 5 or 10 other questions appear on the screen. Or if they say their marital status is married or marital status is divorced and they have 10 children, then maybe you want to populate certain things within your document. So there are lots of conditionality that you can set through Boolean log inside of your document as well, or your document sets. And then finally is repeating items. So you may want to gather information about something that there could be 0 of, or there could be hundreds of, and that's automation that allows you to gather repeating items is really valuable. The two examples I like to give on this are children and shareholders. So for example, in the family law sphere, you may not know if your client has 0 children or 10 children. And so instead of having 10 different form fields for each of the child's name, the child's date of birth, and the child's address, you can just have a repeating item question that continues to loop through and allows them to add as many as they have. Same with shareholders of a company, members of an LLC, again, situations where you have an indeterminate number of items that you're going to be asking about. And so what you can do is turn those into those automation workflows that generate your documents in really a fraction of the time, because instead of you going through your set of 5 different documents that you need to generate for a client, and the other ways that you can use internal tools is for expert systems. So in document automation tools don't necessarily need to actually generate a document. They could just be decision tree logic that generates a decision and tells you how you need to proceed with a particular case. That's often very useful internally to guide your attorneys and staff down picking the right materials and templates that they're going to be using. Or it could be used externally as well to guide your clients in determining whether or not you're the right fit for them, whether you actually take their cases, whether a representation by you is appropriate. So those are internal tools. Now moving to external tools. I always like to say that intake is the gateway drug to document automation. So a lot of attorneys use intake processes, whether those intake processes are paper form, whether they're being emailed, whether they're being used through something like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. Once you realize that you can take that intake data and connect it to documents so that when you get a client in the door, you already have the first set of documents that you need in their case, that's incredibly powerful. So that's often people who haven't used document automation in the past, that's often where they'll start, gathering client data and reusing it within the firm to generate new documents. Second is tools that are free to the public. So we talked a little bit about this before, but we've seen a lot of firms who create tools or content for the public that's free and gets them in the door through some limited scope project, and then later on, when the client needs more sophisticated help, they come to the lawyers for that assistance. If any of you guys have seen Cooley Go's website or Cooley's website called Cooley Go, they do this for basically startups. So they have all kinds of documents that you can access as a startup before when you don't have money for a lawyer, and you can get employee agreements and all kinds of other documents. But then what they're hoping for is that when you're actually raising a round of funding or when you're going to IPO, you're thinking of Cooley Go because you've been using their document products all throughout the process. The third is subscription-based forms. So if you're having people coming to you on a regular basis, asking you for forms, or if you're generating, I used to be working in the employment law field, so I used to see people coming in with asking for employment agreements or contractor agreements or arbitration agreements on a consistent basis. So if you can provide a form site where they can just go to that form site and they will see the most updated version of the document, whether it is, if arbitration rules have changed, you've updated on the back end, that's really valuable. And again, brings us back to what Jared was talking about in terms of price certainty and being able to buy something that you're going to have and have access to a whole bevy of forms that you need throughout the life cycle. And then finally, a full-fledged legal technology company. So this can be something that is basically the TurboTax for law. So whatever your area of law is, we've seen the most common things that we've seen people do this with are family law and estate planning, but it really can be, there are really no limits in terms of what you can build a TurboTax. Have a client building workflows for transfer pricing in a bilingual platform in China and the UK. So things that you may never have actually heard of, or at least I had never heard of transfer pricing before, but it really can be applied to most any area of law. So the next thing I was going to do is just give you a quick overview and we don't have a ton of time left, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how you can actually build a legal product without using any kind of code on Documate. So the three steps would be setting up all your questions to gather the client data. Second would be to connect your questions to your templates. And then third would be to actually publish your legal product. So let me just share another screen with you quickly. I'm just going to briefly go over this. All right, so a lot of people are intimidated by document automation, which is why I wanted to just give you this brief overview. You can build a document automation product without using any kind of code. And what you'll do is, if you're using it on Documate, you'll go to the master dashboard. I've already set one up that I'll go over the few steps for. So if I can either run my workflow, if I click this run button, what that will do for me is actually show me my full workflow, asking all the questions that I need to ask of my client, what's the employee's name, what's their street address, how are they being paid, all questions that are relevant to this particular workflow, which is meant to generate an employee offer letter. If I answer all these questions at the end of the workflow, we'll have our generated document. But you probably want to know how you set this up, because anyone can hire an engineer to help you build a workflow. What's more important is, can you do this super easily on your own without any kind of technical expertise? So what we'll do is we'll go into this offer letter workflow right here. And the process is made up of essentially two tabs. So the two tabs are building out your interview right here and loading all of your output documents. So in this case, we just have one output document that's generated, but you can generate more than one document at one time. So starting with the interview tab, this piece we actually modeled after like SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, Typeform. You can go to the very bottom, add a question, and you have a variety of different options in terms of what question you add. So you can add text questions to add their client data. You can add repeating items to ask for those children's names or the shareholder names. You can add multiple choice or checkbox questions that dictate certain logic within your documents, and you'll give them all variable names. And then the second piece is taking your actual document. So this is my employee offer letter. And what I can do here is I'll load this document tagger that I have on the side here, and I can actually insert those variables. So it has access to all the variable names that I use for my questions. What I can do is, let's say I want the employee's name to appear this employee offer letter right after the dear. I can say insert variable right there. And again, the simple variables are very similar to mail merge, so pretty easy to use. But where you're probably going to find a lot of value is adding kind of conditionality. So if I have this incentive compensation phrase, and let's say I only want it to appear, I want to show this paragraph when payment is being paid annually, and managers is more than one, I can click insert paragraph condition, and it'll insert the syntax for me. So again, you don't need to learn any of the syntax yourself, and it's pretty human readable if you just read where it says if payment is annually and manager's number is more than one, but it's all being inserted by the side panels for you. And you'll do that throughout your document. So there's a ton of conditionality and process you can implement here. Add variables, add conditional phrases, conditional paragraphs, nested logic, adding all kinds of calculations. So let's say you wanted to add or subtract or multiply different numbers, dates and calculating dates. So if you ask someone's age, or if you ask someone's date of birth and you want to calculate their age, that is something that's possible. And then adding lists or tables. So that becomes super valuable with any of your repeating items. So so bird's eye view again, all your questions, you load your output documents and you connect them, and then you're able to run the flow that I had shown you before. So just wanted to give you guys a quick overview for that, and I'll take you back to the slides now. And we can move to Jared.
Look at that.
Jared.
We're almost done. Sorry, I was muted for a second. I'm live. Don't worry. I was just in awe of the demo. So I'm going to do.
You were eaten by the gobbling monster at the top.
It's taken Pac-Man. And I'm actually old enough to have played Pac-Man in the arcade. So we got several ethics questions in the comments section, which I wanted to address briefly. So we've got a question from Stephanie and also a question from Brett. And kind of whenever I talk about like a new way to run this, like the default lawyer mode is wait, that's probably unethical. So here's my take on this. And I thought Spencer had a good response as well, where he talked about doing this as sort of a limited scope retainer. So ethics management for lawyers is all about risk tolerance, right? So I know some lawyers who would say, okay, it's a gray area. And I think it's totally a gray area, by the way. You're not going to find an ethics code out there that says, hey, lawyer, you cannot use products in the law firm. And part of the reason for that is because people who design ethics codes for lawyers are all old, who are out of touch and haven't practiced law in years. It's just the way it goes. So this notion probably doesn't even cross the minds of both ethics attorneys or most of the ethics boards across the various states. That being said, it's a gray area. So as a lawyer, what do you do? Well, I know some lawyers who are, so I'm going to presume that this is going to resolve in the fashion that I want it to resolve, and I will move forward as if what I'm doing is ethical. Okay, I don't necessarily quarrel with that approach. I mean, it's not my malpractice insurance, right? But if you're a lawyer and you're saying, okay, I don't want to go all in on products because I think I might have to provide legal services to make this legitimate, just do that. So don't necessarily sell the document, but sell the document plus limited legal services attached to it, right? So the idea is not to make this necessarily like an open-ended agreement, right? Because that's a problem with legal agreements generally. Like no one wants to sign up to an open-ended agreement that never ends. So you say, hey, here's a document. You can complete, fill out a draft, and then we'll have an hour meeting to discuss the document. And I can provide my advice and suggestions on that. And that can be a real live limited scope representation, but that covers you a little bit. I know some attorneys who will sell documents, but will do so out of a separate business that's not a law firm. And then this gets into some other gray areas as well. And it's not just an ethics problem. with respect to this. It's also an insurance problem. So you go to the malpractice insurance provider and you say, hey, I want to sell legal products. A lot of them will be like, what now? So part of this is getting coverage on the malpractice side. Part of this is feeling comfortable about the risk allocation. So there are attorneys who are risked, most attorneys, but there are also attorneys who are a lot less risk averse. So I'm not an ethics attorney, so I'm not giving an ethics attorney answer. I'm giving the practical answer. But I think if you feel uncomfortable with just selling products, attach some level of service, not to the extent where you're going back to this completely wide open representation. So folks can comment on that if they want. Folks can ask additional questions. I'm happy to entertain those. Those are my general thoughts on the ethics issue with respect to products and legal. Any application in the ethics rules is going to be potentially a stretch. There's not going to be a direct prohibition. So let me do a quick underview, and then we can take like 5 minutes or so for questions if folks have them. And you can add your questions to group chat, which it seems like people are using very effectively. So in terms of document products in law firms that you can create and their effect on your law firm revenue, like the bottom line of what you can make. One thing that's really helpful, as I just mentioned, is this will to effectively reduce rates. So because consumers have so much power, because the way they purchase things is changing, that has law firm rates. Law firms are generally reducing their rates, make sure that they can answer this consumer pressure. So is that, again, you can scale that. You can sell more of those products without necessarily hiring more people. In technology, you're often bound to be more efficient doing it this way than utilizing to manage this. So it gives you a way to answer that client question of why do legal services cost so much? You don't, as far as this option is concerned. And I can also give you that total cost that you're looking for. As again, I said previously, like great way to get revenue from DIY clients who will not use a lawyer, but which you're capturing from right now. Let them use LegalZoom. Get to them first. So this was just something we brought up in terms of the ethics stuff. It's a way to do a limited scope representation, which not only protects the lawyer, but also protects the clients a little bit, right? It not only gives an opportunity for the client out of the legal supervision, it gives the lawyer an option to get out. So you have parts A, C, and D that you could work on with the client. Let's say you work on part A and you decide client sucks. I want to get out of this representation. Easy for you to do so. Whereas in traditional engagement agreement, you're stuck, especially if you're in court with a client, right? Giving yourself the out, writing that into the fee agreement, being really clear about what the scope is, I think is important, especially in terms of like services attached to. Also help you project revenue, right? You project revenue when you can say, oh, I can sell this document for, I'm to charge more than this, $50, right? If I do that 10 times a year, I make an extra $500. That online, that's additional revenue from me. How do I reach my projected hours, track hours? There's things I do that cost me several hours rather than a client filling out a form, right? So that helps with calculation as well. And then there's also a notion that I refer to as super delegation. In the traditional law firm context, you're delegating to paralegals or associates, like who's working at your law firm. Isn't it awesome to be able to delegate to your clients the work that you would otherwise do for them, like filling in that document? Isn't it nice that maybe your client could do that, not the secretary you pay to do that work traditionally? Saves you time, makes you more efficient. And if you've got software to render client-specific documents out of templates, why not push the data entry onto the client and still charge them for it? That's a good deal, right? So the bottom line of all of this is you're becoming more efficient. And I talked about how important that efficiency is to the bottom line revenue for a law firm. You're expanding your customer base and you're gaining revenue simply by different way to sell legal services to consumers. And I'll end there. And I think we have a few minutes for questions, unless you want to add anything, Dorna, that I may have missed.
No, that's perfect. I think that's where we take it to the next slide. So I guess if anyone has any questions, if you want to chime in on the group chat, or I don't see any new questions here.
People are
and
amazed,
also, since we only have a few
staggered.
minutes.
They're like, I'm so inspired. See, if there's no more questions,
Also flip to this page. So if you guys have any, here's our information. If you guys want to contact us, and I guess I didn't put our email address, but I actually put our meeting invite here. So if anyone wants to book a time to talk to me, that's on there. Oh, and I see some people have asked questions. So Spencer asked, any suggestions on how to get clients to do some of the work without feeling like they're not getting what they're paying for? So maybe I'll also answer it if you'd like. So basically what we've seen is that, you may already be interfacing with clients and asking them to gather client data through the intake process. So you don't want them to feel like they're doing too much. I would just have them feel like an intake process. Send them a web link. You can even have them do it in your office. You can build these systems so that they're mobile friendly, tablet friendly. Have them sit in your office and fill out the information that they have, and then take that data and generate the documents yourself. A lot of areas of law may have certain questions that are answerable by the client, like what's your name and what are all your assets, things like that. But then I have other questions that are easier answered by the attorney. So you can have it be sort of a dual system.
Right, and I think
and then it looks like Aaron also actually answered Aaron Levine from Hello Divorce is on here as well. Hi, Aaron. It looks like she also answered this question and said, make it super easy on them and explain your value. And I know Aaron's done a great job with that with Hello Divorce.
And then the only other thing I would say here is, part of this is frictionless entry points, right? Like, that's what modern consumers want. I didn't say that explicitly before, but that's part of what's happening. Easier and quicker you can make it for your clients to access your services, the better. So instead of having them fill in a traditional form, right, or call somebody at your office, it's much easier to sit at their computer like 2 a.m. if they want and fill in their own information. And in terms of clients, never like customers as morons, right? In the legal context, when I was working in a law firm or otherwise, I would also direct with clients and say, this is a different way to provide legal services. The reason I can charge you is because I'm giving you the opportunity to input data, and I don't have to pay a secretary to do it, right? So this is the trade-off that takes place. And I think it's fine to go that route as well. But generally speaking, I think people want convenience, and it provides convenience. And that's one of the value points that you can sell as a law firm. And Dorna, I see you have a couple specific questions there. So for me, I will say that I had a hard stop at 3. So I have to be out at this point. But it looks like Dorna can answer a couple of questions for you in terms of Documate and how that works. And thanks, Dorna, for having me. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it. This was great.
I'll answer. There's a few other questions that were on the group chat that I can answer now. And of course, you can either set up a meeting on my calendar if you wanted that link, or just email me at dorna@documate.org. But let me answer these questions. So Stephanie asked, can you briefly discuss your systems? So yes, obviously security is important for the types of data that you guys are all gathering, client data, sometimes even social security numbers that are coming through there. We actually set up every one of our clients on their own AWS instance with your own database, which is segregated from all of our other clients. You'll be on your own subdomain. And that's beyond what a lot of other software companies online do. But we think, obviously, because 95% of our customers are lawyers, it's incredibly important to segregate that data. Another thing you should look for that we do in any software that you're getting for that's going to have client data in it is end-to-end encryption. And then, just making sure that you have full control over deleting your data, because, now being mandated by a lot of laws now, but you're going to want you and your clients have control over deleting data off of servers so that it doesn't get maintained afterwards. Ellen also asked, have you had litigators use forms? Yes, I can give you a few ideas of ways to use forms in litigation. Drafting the initial complaint, if you have something that is template-based or where you have lots of causes of action that you could put in. Drafting the initial discovery. We have someone, a client who's actually using this that I know of, who's using this for responding to discovery. That's a little bit harder because it's not as template-based. Setting up different motions, anything that involves court forms. In California, we have the judicial counsel forms. That can all be automated. And putting together an answer for a complaint. So it depends where you are and what state you're in and what the requirements are. But in California, you can file a general denial and add affirmative defense. And so an answer to a complaint is very much something that can be automated. And I see there's another question about, Dorna, are you aware of any social media groups where lawyers who are interested in productization can participate? That's a really good question. I don't know of any off the top of my head. I can look into that. We do have a Slack group for our users where we allow people, we have a whole channel on show and tell, so you can post about what you've built and share it with others. So I can share the link to that group, but I will also look into whether there's anything else out there that exists, because that's a great idea on ways for lawyers like you guys to be able to communicate with each other and share ideas. All right, so it looks like there aren't any other questions. I don't think I've missed any. So if anyone has any questions afterwards, again, I'm available. And thank you all for coming to this presentation and looking forward to talking to you guys in the future. And I'll also be sending around a video of the webinar as well. All right, thanks everyone.